Hi there, I'm Crystal from livingwithgastroparesis.com. I am a coach, an author, and I spent the last decade helping people worldwide learn to live well with gastroparesis. In today's video, I actually want to talk about why I'm still here talking about gastroparesis after all this time. Stick around. So, if you have been following me for a while, you might know that there have been several instances over the last decade plus, almost 12 years now, I think, that I have been doing this work with gastroparesis and sharing about my own experience with gastroparesis, that I have kind of said, I'm done. I'm stepping back. I've said all I have to say. And I've done that for periods of time, but I keep coming back. And I've questioned this a lot over the last several years in particular, where I felt like I just kind of wanted to be done. Like I didn't really want to be talking about gastroparesis anymore. I had spent almost 20 years of my life personally. I was diagnosed in 2004 with idiopathic gastroparesis. So it's been 18 years since my own diagnosis and 12 years since I started my practice helping other people with gastroparesis. And that's just a lot of gastroparesis. And so I really have felt at various times and quite a bit, like I said, in the last few years, that I just didn't want to talk about it anymore. And yet, if you watch this channel or follow me on other platforms, you know that I keep coming back. And I thought about that and I've kind of wondered about that and been curious about that. And I think more recently it's really occurred to me what's behind that. And I wanted to talk about that today. And so to me, living well with gastroparesis, that phrase has kind of evolved over the years. But what it means to me now is living a really full life with gastroparesis as, a piece of that, but almost like a background piece, right? Some like a program that just kind of runs in the background that you don't do much with, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about. And so that's where I am personally right now. I currently do have gastroparesis symptoms. I have not had a gastric emptying scan recently, but it's pretty clear to me personally that I do have delayed gastric emptying right now after a period of remission. I've never liked to call it that. I would say my symptoms resolved for several years, but I know some people call it remission. So either way, um, my symptoms essentially resolved for a couple of years. And then there were a number of factors that kind of compounded each other. And here we are back to a pretty consistent experience of gastroparesis symptoms. But I would not say I suffer from gastroparesis. There's really not a lot of suffering around it, if any, ever for me at this point. I experience symptoms, yes. I have physical experiences as a result of gastroparesis. I make certain choices and not other choices as a result of gastroparesis, but it is very truly in the background of my life. And in in that experience of getting to that place, the rest of my life has gotten so much bigger, so much fuller. Um, And it occurred to me recently that I think that's why I can't just step away, because to me, this is what living well with gastroparesis really means. And so, why would I get to that point and then be like, bye, I'm not sharing about this, right? I want to share the full experience of living with gastroparesis, which, if you actually watch my videos kind of over time, I think it shows a lot of that experience and a lot of that progression. But what a disservice I would be doing if everything I ever created was about managing symptoms, was about a real intense focus on gastroparesis, without also showing and saying and encouraging that life with gastroparesis can still just be life, right? Like really full. I got an Instagram comment recently that said something along the lines of, it's really inspiring to see you post travel videos. And over on Instagram, I post a little bit more about my travels. And somebody said that's really hopeful because I don't feel like I'll ever be able to travel or do anything that I love again. And that really hit me because it was like, to me, my job, quote unquote, right? My role for a long time has been to talk about managing gastroparesis and kind of practical information. And then even more recently, talk about, our experience of gastroparesis and how that can shift even separate from our symptom management. But that comment kind of led me to realize that there's even more than that. There's showing all of the ways in which life goes on even after a gastroparesis diagnosis, all of the ways that life can be full and big and exciting and fulfilling, even with gastroparesis. And of course, we go through phases, right? I mean, when you're first diagnosed, I think most of us feel overwhelmed. I think a lot of us are experiencing fear and worry and what does this mean and frustration and all of those things. That's why all of the practical information that I've created is important because you want to know how do I feel better? I mean, that's a real valid, important question, and the information that's available for that is important. If you are in that space and you are looking for just a place to get started, you can go right now to livingwithgastroparesis.com and download my quick start ebook. It's totally free. It's 40 pages. It goes through all of that practical stuff. How do you start to feel better, right? And so that's a part of it. That's a part of it. And so much of my work was focused on that. Years and years of my work was focused on that. But I think it's important to say that's a part of it. But there's so much more. There's a point where you can live with gastroparesis and do all of those things because they become, habit, and you just know what to do and you make choices based on what makes sense to you in a moment. And you can live a super full life and you can travel and you can do all kinds of things. We're going on an international trip soon in a few weeks. My family and I, we're going to London for 9 days. And a few weeks after that, I'm going to be hiking the Grand Canyon to the bottom and back to the top. And these are things that initially I didn't think I would share because on the surface, well, that has nothing to do with gastroparesis. But yeah, it has everything to do with living well with gastroparesis, with continuing to do the things that are important to you, continuing to do the things that, give you energy and light you up and excite you in the context of gastroparesis. And I think part of the other thing that I saw most recently was that the stuff that I do now, it's not that I ignore the fact that I have gastroparesis. I actually did go through that phase as well. When my symptoms resolved for a while and then they came back, I was kind of like, well, I'm just not even gonna acknowledge that. I'm gonna pretend that's not happening. And as you can imagine, that did not end super well for me from a like physical comfort perspective, right? I was having a lot of increased physical symptoms, and eventually I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And it was at that point that I kind of really started to see that we can do all of these practical things. We can, I don't like the word manage because that makes it sound like it's really up to us what our symptoms do. And I'm not convinced that that's the case. I think the choices that we make absolutely play a role and factor in, but the idea that we could control our symptoms or specifically manage our symptoms, Um, I don't know, but the choices that we make do have an impact on how we feel physically. And so why wouldn't we make those choices that make sense to us and continue to do all these other things that are important to us? And that's the place that I am now. And that is what living well really means in my mind. Living well to me doesn't mean following a set of rules to ensure that you are as symptom free as possible, and therefore spending every moment of your waking day checking things off, a checklist of all of the things you need to do, because I've been there too. And I've had clients more recently who were there, who literally had, Excel spreadsheets of all the things they needed to do to manage their gastroparesis. And that was their entire day. And then they were wondering, I feel so overwhelmed. Of course, because we are so singularly focused on doing all of these things to guarantee a particular outcome that we can't even really guarantee. And what about everything else that makes life fun and interesting and engaging, right? What's the point of doing all those things if there's no time left for anything that's fun and interesting and engaging? So that's why I'm still here talking about this, because every year that goes by, every insight that occurs to me around all of this stuff, it has taken me to a place that I think is more and more and more what the idea of living well meant to me right from the get-go. And I feel like that's something that needs to continue to be shared, because you can find all kinds of content on the internet about the really focused part of gastroparesis, right? I mean, you can find the minutia, you can find just soul blinders, nothing but gastroparesis, accounts that are just all about gastroparesis. And I'm not super sure that that does a ton of good in the long run, because I think that keeps us singularly focused on something that feels hard when we could be inviting in some other stuff that feels light, fun, fulfilling, interesting, energizing, hopeful, right? And we can still do the things that make sense to us and the things that we know help us at the same time. So that is becoming, I think, my driving mission right now, is to continue to share a picture of what my version of living well with gastroparesis looks like. I want to continue bringing you guys stories of other people and what their version of living well with gastroparesis looks like. And I have some plans to bring you more discussions with other coaches around areas that are related to gastroparesis that I kind of didn't really think of before, because my focus was pretty singularly on like managing gastroparesis. But I want to talk about things in the context of living with gastroparesis. I want to talk about parenting in the context of living with gastroparesis. I want to talk about body image in the context of living with gastroparesis. Disordered eating. It's something we don't talk a lot about, but it's not because it's not an issue. And so my goal right now is to expand our focus a little bit, because if you want those real focused things, if you want that real practical info, it's all here for you. It is all here for you if that's the stage you are in. But don't limit yourself to only those real focused things, because there's a lot to be heard in the broader conversation, and stuff that if I had heard this stuff, if I had considered this stuff, a decade ago, like I don't even know where I would be, but it's neither here nor there. So I know this was a little rambly, but it felt like something that's been on my mind that I just wanted to share where the direction of things are going. And I hope that's interesting to you. I hope that's something that feels like it will contribute positively to our community. Um, and I appreciate you being here. I will see you next time.